for the purpose of the intake itself. Does that, I
Mhm.
don't know if that,
Yes, thank you.
Can I also ask, just so I'm sure I understand the point, because I heard you saying something different, and I have to look at the language again to see. So the point is, on design, if we really are saying that subsurface, let's set aside existing, expanded, or whatever. Let's talk just into the future.
Got it.
Projects that aren't,
Brand new plan.
because we hope this policy will last a good long while. You're saying that we need to be clearer on feasibility in the sense that we should be driving people towards areas without doing maps. I don't like the idea of us doing a map telling anybody. We don't do that kind of statewide zoning. I don't want to go there personally. Maybe someday, but not right now. Is that just because you pick a location shouldn't be the sole driver. We should be encouraging it in places where they can do subsurface, because that's the preferred technology, and somehow that has to factor in. And conceivably, you could have some community that just doesn't have any capacity for subsurface, and they desperately need water, and this is a tool they want to use in their toolkit, right? So you wouldn't ban it except where you can do subsurface. But I hear you saying that somewhere in this cost feasibility analysis, we shouldn't just let people say, we want this massive amount of water, and subsurface doesn't work for that big of a thing in a given location.
That's right. If you do,
Off into the future, so that people are
if you-
targeting better sizing and location for fish and desal.
That's right. I think if you don't discuss design capacity at all, which I think this policy does, it just completely backs away from it, then you let the permittees write their own permit by selecting whatever capacity they want, and that drives.
And working backwards from
Yeah,
there.
and that's what's happened this entire time. And, there are subsurface, we see subsurface galleries, infiltration galleries, as kind of the second preferred alternative, or the second best available. And those do work in most places. And they do accommodate a certain amount of MGDs. It shouldn't be impossible to find any site in a certain area that needs some desal water to be able to implement at least a gallery as the secondary alternative.
Great, thank you. I know there's more, but that's helpful. Next, we have Patricia Chen with the South Coast Water District, followed by Sean Haggerty, City of Santa Barbara.
Good afternoon. My name is Patricia Chen, and I'm here on behalf of South Coast Water District. We echo the appreciation expressed by the other speakers for the hard work of staff in putting together the draft document. We have previously submitted comments and have actively participated in the Ocean Plan amendment process because we have two projects that will be impacted. The district is the owner and operator of a brackish groundwater recovery facility, and which by year end will produce approximately 20% of the district's potable water supply. And the district is also a participating agency of the Doheny Ocean Desal project, which is currently underway in Dana Point. That's the project that Richard Bell commented on. The district has expended a significant amount of resources developing these projects because of the district's belief in the importance of having reliable local sources of water in light of the water shortage in the state and in the event of any catastrophe which may interrupt our supply of imported water. With respect to the groundwater recovery facility, we strongly believe that brine discharge should be allowed to be commingled with treated wastewater as long as there's no significant impact on water quality or beneficial uses at the outfall. We want to be very clear here. This is a discharge commingled with wastewater, which goes to the ocean in an ocean outfall. Therefore, it's very important to us that the Ocean Plan amendments address this issue. In November of 2008, the district was forced to reroute its brine discharge to the sewer for treatment at the Latham plant because the regional board revised its NPDES permit for the San Juan Creek ocean outfall to require compliance with Table A standards at the facility rather than at the outfall. The district incurred a $204,000 mandatory minimum penalty for exceeding total suspended solids, settable solids, and turbidity at the GRF, even though none of these standards were ever exceeded at the outfall as a result of the commingled discharge. The district spent another $250,000 to manage compliance issues in litigation with the regional board and over the appropriate standards. Ultimately, SB 607 was passed to bring this issue to the state board for resolution, and that is expected to occur within the ocean plan amendments. When the district's permit was up for renewal in 2012, citing the innocuous nature of the brine discharge and its interest in new alternative water supply sources, the state board suggested that the regional board allow the district to discharge brine to the outfall as an interim solution while it addressed the issues in the ocean plan amendments. We have been appreciative of staff's attention on this issue, and we see that in the draft amendments, there's a recognition that of commingling with brine effluent with treated wastewater as a preferred disposal method. However, we're extremely disappointed that the draft amendments do not appear to address brine discharge from brackish groundwater facilities like the GRF. The district spent over $5.8 million to construct the GRF and over $500,000 addressing its brine discharge. The state board has repeatedly indicated that the brine discharge would be addressed through the ocean plan amendments. Without direction from the ocean plan amendments, the district is concerned that the GRF will once again be precluded from commingling its brine discharge with treated wastewater at the outfall. We urge the state board to address this issue in the current draft amendments. The district has been waiting over 2 years for a permanent solution, and it should not have to endure continuing regulatory uncertainty. We will be submitting written comments proposing language to address brackish groundwater facilities in these amendments, and we hope to engage staff in further dialogue on this issue. I also wanted to comment on the use of treated wastewater that was raised by Southern California Watershed Alliance. We believe that the determination of the best use of treated wastewater is one that should be decided by local agencies based on site-specific circumstances. We don't want language in the ocean plan that imposes a blanket prohibition on the use of wastewater for commingling where the wastewater is suitable for recycling. As recognized by staff, in many cases, using treated wastewater for commingling may well be the best option. Those are my comments.
Okay,
Thank you.
Can you all explain why this was in it, now it's out? What's the, you did make an explicit thing that it wasn't covered,
Well, I don't
but it
believe,
sounds like they thought it was going to be covered and now it's not covered, so can you?
So this is something that we've heard almost unanimously amongst the commenters, is they hate this line. And this line was put in towards the end of our development process, and it was simply with the recognition that we did not want to preclude the use of recycled water.
Oh, no, I'm not
by-
talking about that one. We'll talk
Okay.
about how to deal with that. I'm talking about the issue of
so we're going
their
to,
brine discharge not being a part of this.
right, we need to look into the language, because my
Sorry, I didn't mean to
understanding is
interrupt
that
you, but-
that's not correct, that if it's a brine discharge, you have to meet the requirements of the brine discharge. But you guys are looking at me, so maybe I've missed something.
Unfortunately, I think the answer is it depends. So initially, we were intending to also amend the enclosed base estuaries and
Well, this is
inlands.
not a discharge to enclosed basin estuary.
Right, but we were also, it's kind of wrapped in because we talked about groundwater and inland and where that cutoff point is. And that was the question of, well, where's your intake and then how is that in relation to the discharge? And so we got into scoping issues, and should this proposed amendment cover things like, we went broader, any brine discharge, things like cheese factories, breweries. And so the problem with those facilities was we just didn't have enough information to broadly apply this without unintended consequences. Now, in their case, we've heard of facilities that are desalinating brackish groundwater and then discharging into the ocean. And so this is something that may be more easily incorporated into the proposed amendment. But again, it's this question of where's the facility located and what are the circumstances and how do we draw that line in written language in the proposed amendment?
Can you meet with them? Because it just seems like they've been on one of those odysseys. I've been in that space as a facility manager, and it's infuriating. So if you guys can just talk to them and just have a path, since it sounds like they've been looking for a path for a long time.
We will do that because I think it might have been Phil and I that met back to say that we'll get this temporary solution to take you out of this silly situation, and that we would deal with it when we get the brine discharge in the permit. So this is the first I've heard that it might not work, and it should work, because it's the
Okay.
brine discharge from a desalination facility. It's not the same as a brine
Cheese
discharge from a cheese factory or a brewery.
No
And so
disparaging of the importance of cheese or beer.
I agree completely, but
Those are important public goods as well, but we don't have utilities that,
yeah, and so
At least not yet.
we will work together, and I'm glad you brought it to our attention, because I thought it was already covered, as you can see, and so we'll
Okay.
make sure it
we
works.
got a little follow-up there.
That's good. I conceptually, you know, from the salinity management standpoint and my decades of experience in the issue, I can't see how we can't come to some agreement on that. I appreciate, Jonathan, your comments affirming that.
Sean Haggerty, Santa Barbara, followed by Paul Schoenberg from Mesa Water District.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board.
Wow.
Sean Haggerty, I'm a partner with the law firm of Best & Krieger, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the city of Santa Barbara. The city thanks the board for the opportunity to participate in this workshop, and I've learned a lot through the discussion today, both from the staff presentation and then some of the comments, so I greatly appreciate that. We also have already taken advantage of the one-on-one opportunity and would continue to take advantage of opportunities to meet with staff to address our concerns. The city, as reflected in the staff report, is an owner of a facility, existing desal facility, and our concerns really relate to how this plan would apply to that facility. I want to put it in a little bit of context based upon the goals of the amendments as expressed in the staff report on page 22. There are 3 goals. I want to highlight 2 of them. Some of this has been mentioned already, but it's important for the city's perspective. One goal is to support the use of ocean water as a reliable supplement to traditional water supply while protecting beneficial uses. Now, that was somewhat different than the phrasing of it that you saw in the staff presentation, so that may be something that we'll comment on, but the way it's phrased in the staff report on page 22 is as I just read it to you. And then another goal is promoting interagency collaboration regarding siting and design of these facilities. Consistent with these goals from the city's perspective, desal has long been an important part of our water supply planning. And the city has worked consistent with this interagency collaboration idea. The city has worked collaboratively with a variety of agencies to permit and construct an existing facility. Back in 1991, the city voters supported desalinization as a part of the city's long-term water supply plan. Consistent with that, by 1992, the city had constructed and was operating a desal facility in accordance with existing permits. In 1994, the permanent desal facility was made a part of the city's long-term water supply plan. And by 1996, the city had obtained permits for the permanent desalinization facility, including permits from the Coastal Commission and MPDS permit from the Regional Board and other applicable agencies. Now, as part of that whole process, there was extensive environmental review that was done, including 2 EIRs that were prepared and additional studies, including studies related to subsurface intakes and that specifically related to wells, use of wells. And so a lot of analysis was done at the time and reflected in the records before the various agency and before the city. In 1997, the facility was placed in standby mode, which currently sits right now. And that was a very specific plan that was approved by the City Council. And the plan was designed to ensure that the plant could be reactivated as required by the long-term water supply plan and consistent with the permits that existed for this facility. So now here we sit in 2014. Obviously, we face significant drought problems and conditions, and the city is currently considering moving the plant back to operational mode consistent with all the previous information that I provided and its specific plan regarding standby. So in that context, we are very much concerned about the proposed amendments because we think as phrased, the amendments as applied to the city will undermine the ability to achieve the stated goals of the amendments, as well as specific to Santa Barbara, will prevent the city potentially from implementing this part of its long-term planning process. And we're going to provide very detailed comments, and we'll continue to work with staff on these issues. But our main concern relates to the approach to and the application of Section 13142.5B. I think there was some very positive discussion about the nature of that code section today in terms of how it does place limits on the regulatory authority of the board and specific to new and expanded facilities. It's a very different situation than you face in other contexts, including on the ones through cooling policies. This is not specific to the Clean Water Act, so it's a very different context. And we're very concerned about specifically the definition of existing facility in the plan because we read it to apply to us and treat us as, exclude us and treat us as a new or expanded facility, which is hard to really justify, at least in our mind, in terms of how we're treated in the staff report, which identifies us as an existing facility. Certainly, it's inconsistent with the facts on the ground. I think it's inconsistent with a common usage of what it means to exist. And so we have just concerns that will be expressed related to that. And I think our city's view is that we're an existing facility and should be treated as such.
Remind me, how, you say that just start again, what are
Sure.
you concerned about in the definition and what do you see the staff reports? I should know this. but
Sure. Staff.
Now I'm confused by what the,
Okay, staff report treats us as an existing facility. The definition of existing facility in the first line would apply to us and treat us as an existing facility, but in the second line it says existing facilities do not include any facilities for which the regional board did not make a specific 13142.5B finding, or I'm sorry, it specifically says determination. And so that's the question
Right.
about how this applies to this unique
Right.
situation in Santa Barbara.
now I remember that.
Yeah.
All right.
So, our view is it should define us as an existing facilities, and we should be treated as such. And we also have some broader concerns about the application of this code section to the type of facility that Santa Barbara has, and certainly specifically applying that now to our facility as it sits today. I also think, just as an aside, listening to the discussion and even in the amendments themselves, these code sections are very specific and the words really do mean a lot, and it's very, I know it's just common usage, but we tend to shorten things. So instead of best available, we tend to say best, and we sometimes forget that there's also the word feasible in the statute itself. And so I think it's really important to be very clear throughout the document. We'll comment on that, but it's really an important point for us. A second issue, it's somewhat secondary, but it was raised in the staff report. There is language currently in the proposed amendments that talk about this waiver related to emergency declarations. The staff presented it, and we heard in our one-on-one that it was originally thought of to deal with earthquake situations, how that might apply to drought situations, and whether it's a useful tool or not for a situation like Santa Barbara or others. I think really needs to be explored and clarified, so that if that is something that could be taken advantage of, it needs to be much clearer than it currently is right now. So with that, we'll submit very detailed written comments. We do look forward to working with staff on these issues, and we believe that we should be treated as an existing facility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paul Schoenberg from Mesa Water District, followed by Stephen Keys with a new technology. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, and staff. Thank you very much for having us here. It's a very important issue, and very much appreciate all the time and effort that you're taking into this consideration, and all the work that staff went through to put together the draft amendments. I also work for a board, and I can't imagine putting together a 500-page document in such a quick time. So really a big effort, and I want to thank you all for that. It is difficult times for water managers in California right now. On the statewide level and also the local level. I'm general manager of Mesa Water District, which is a local retailer, and it has been very tough for us recently. Your board has had to make some emergency drought recommendations, and we are seriously considering those and implementing them. We are writing notices of violation and implementing everything that you guys have recommended and doing additional things. I have to tell you that it's very tough for local water managers in this type of situation. Our board of directors, politically, it's very difficult for them to raise rates for any reason, but we have in the past to ensure, for one thing, supply reliability. And it's tough politically, and it's tough professionally for staff to let our district know that even though we have raised rates and we've invested in conservation, we've invested in groundwater cleanup, we've invested in recycled water, and they have done a great job at conservation. We've met our 2020 goals already, but we're continuing on. And even with all those efforts, we still need to ask them to conserve more and to modify their behavior more. And I've had many conversations with businesses and residents about the current situation. And like I said, it's tough times right now. Our board, many years ago, in discussing these type of issues, have put forth for themselves a board policy position to support the development of new water supplies. So our board supports additional conservation, groundwater cleanup, desalination, and recycled water, and whatever new reliable supplies that can be brought on in an economically and environmentally good manner. So with that, we have been following these regulations and encourage staff and the board to keep flexibility and understand that there are a lot of site-specific issues. And with Mr. Bell from MODOC talking about the precise geology of the Doheny site, and that type of geology differs everywhere you're at. You can see how site specificity and local control is very important to us. The flexibility is important for the brine discharge. I like the fact that we have a mixing zone and a level outside of that, which we need to adhere to. That's very specific, yet it gives us flexibility on how to do it. Most of us water managers are engineers, so if you give us a target, we will hit it. So it's a little more confusing for us when words are used like we must minimize or we must maximize, because those aren't specific. That's not a target I can hit. And I think the regional boards need some more specificity in some areas. We are in the middle of reviewing all these documents, and we'll have additional comments on the 19th, so maybe back here again. In the draft, when it's finalized, some of the studies that these local agencies have undertaken, I think could be highlighted a little bit more, and I think if fully vetted, could maybe change some of the conclusions or recommendations that staff has come up with. To name a few of these: San Diego Water Authority's Camp Pendleton Desalination Feasibility Study and Environmental Technical Studies, West Basin's Ocean Water Demonstration Project, MODOC's Orange Coast Ocean Desalination Project Slant Well Project, Cambria's Seawater Desalination Project EIR, CalAM's Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Final EIR, Long Beach Department's Under Ocean Floor Intake and Discharge Demonstration Project, Santa Cruz's Desalination EIR, and the AES Retooling Project Cumulative Impact Study. So a couple of those were mentioned, but or referred to, but it didn't really feel like they were fully vetted and brought into the study. So would encourage some work with that. And also would encourage, I'm not sure what's going on interdepartmental or between the state agencies, but try to avoid overlapping regulations, and working with the Ocean Protection Council and your other agencies, the Coastal Commission and State Lands, to make sure that what we're creating here can, help and complement to what they're doing also. So those are my comments, and we'll answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have a question?
I appreciate you pointing to the current, research being done and processes, and I saw a lot of that reflected in staff's work, but we'll certainly look at your suggested comments.
Thank you. Mr. Keys, followed by Dave Bolin from Aqua.
Howdy, my name is Stephen Keys, and I'm the president of Effluent Free Desalination, a new company as of last week. We have a technology to take seawater or brackish water, produce 100% of the water out of it as distilled water, and the rest as dry salt. What that means is no brine discharge. What is it? The term of art is hypersaline concentrated brine discharge or something. So our request to the commission is that you add to the ocean plan that the preferred technology is no discharge of brine to the ocean. So what we've got is a combination of two existing technologies. They've been around for a long time. One of them makes almost all of the pills that we take everywhere. The pharmaceutical industry has used spray drying forever, practically. The other technology is called vapor compression distillation, which was developed in the 40s for submarines and was the darling of desalination until about the 70s, mid-70s or so, when reverse osmosis came along. Vapor compression distillation died largely. Well, no, it's still used for medical water and some things like that. But it died because it ignored a principle that most of us learned in middle school general science. And in fact, if the engineers had been working on it, checked with their spouses from the kitchen, they would have gotten good advice, which would have fixed the problem, which is simply that if you increase the pressure on water, you raise its boiling point. If you raise its boiling point, it doesn't form bubbles in the heat exchanger, leaving its residue, clogging it up and requiring rebuilding, cleaning out, or whatever. So by simply adding vapor compression distillation, which is used primarily to recapture heat, which means that we get about 95% efficiency on the heat cycle, and the second, spray drying, to separate steam, which becomes the distilled water, and salt crystals, or whatever else happens to be in the seawater or the brackish water. And It's a process that right now looks economically about comparable to reverse osmosis. But we have some ideas that might improve that. The other thing is that it is an ideal technology to add to the back end of a reverse osmosis plant for a couple of reasons. One of them, of course, is it gets all of the water instead of only 40-some-odd% out. And the other is that it gets all of the salt as dry salt. Well, it turns out that that salt is worth more than the water. The only constraint is it has to be in high enough volume to be worth shipping somewhere. And I was just talking to the guy from Poseidon, Peter. He says he calculates that that plant, the one at Carlsbad, will produce 3 trains a mile long each a day of salt if they got all of the salt out of their water. If they used our process, they would. And that salt would be worth more than the San Diego Water Authority would be paying them for the water. Our plan is to have a demonstration plant working in the spring. We found 2 manufacturers in the country who can do this, and there will be others, and some abroad. But we've got 2 of them. In fact, bringing one of their representatives out in a couple of weeks to meet with Panoche Water District and Carl Longley down in Fresno, and with Cal American Water here. So we think we're talking with most of the right people. Now I hope we're talking with the really the power behind the activities around here. If you all have any questions, I come from Silicon Valley, so I think about innovation and technology as the way to solve most everything. And the inventor lives out here in Sacramento, so we are available to discuss this with staff, with anybody else. I appreciate all the comments of most everybody here, because one, you help set the stage for really solving the problem, and we'd be happy to talk with you. And I have my business card. So,
Thank you, sir. We'll keep in touch. We would not be able to change this policy based on the theory of this now. I mean, we'd have to hold it up for all the time it would take for you to have a demonstration project at scale and all that, but folks can follow it. I mean, it's good for you to be in touch with us, but we wouldn't. We've done this based on expert panel, long review, et cetera, and so we don't just do a policy.
yeah.
No, you're probably completely right. I wish you well, but we wouldn't be able to hold up a policy to change what the preferred option was. But it wouldn't exclude what you do, and it wouldn't exclude at all as being a preferred, someone coming in to do a site-specific thing, or in the future, us amending the policy, because as you heard earlier, we have a lot more leeway on discharges than we do.
So
To upgrade as the technology.
one of the advantages of this technology is that there's an economic incentive on the part of the operators to do it regardless of what you say.
Right.
So
Could you leave your business card with the clerk, please? And does it have your website? You don't have website yet? Okay.
We're not webmasters. We've got something here. We've got the patent up there and a few other things, but sorry, we'll probably have the demonstration site up and running and sold before we get the website going. Sorry.
You probably got my Emily Latella reference too. So. Generational. Dave Bolin, Mr. Bolin, good to see you as always, followed by Craig Johns.
Good afternoon, Chairman Marcus and members of the board. Again, it's pleasant to be here again on many different issues. I guess I love the way sometimes previous speakers tee up my points. If you wait long enough, pretty much everything's been said, but you haven't said it.
There's a strategy where some people like putting their cards in first, and some people wait.
True.
I tend to be a waiter, but it's
yeah, because
interesting
pretty much everything will come up eventually. Right. So I do want to underscore a few points that have been made already, but just kind of I'd like to make them. A major one being, my name is Dave Boland, Association of California Water Agencies. I want to start with that. And kind of at the highest level policy, big picture, we appreciate the way in which this effort is trying to we're trying to work that in with all the other policy efforts that the Water Board's trying to do now, and that many other parts of state government are doing right now to move what we're calling the Water Action Plan, which has always sort of been our action plan, but it's been officially put in on paper, and it's out there now, and it's something we can all rally around. The importance of desal and the importance of a portfolio approach is underscored in not only that document, but also the California Water Plan, which has all these different chapters on different technologies and available strategies for meeting our water needs in California. And of course, desalination is right up there with many of the others. We've had mention of recycled water and stormwater and other kinds of water management practices, and they all relate back together. And as you understand and appreciate the fact that all of these decisions need to be made at a local level with specific facts on the ground and in a context. And I think the previous speakers, many of the water agency folks, have demonstrated the fact that there are particular studies that have been done, particular contexts for proposals for different desal plants and different technologies that are available. And what it underscores is the importance of, and the previous speaker actually kind of brought up a whole new idea of, here's a technology that maybe wasn't on the radar screen that maybe needs to be eventually, but that there's this whole diversity, I guess, of context for making decisions, and that crafting the policy needs to be an art between trying to achieve our overall policy objectives, which is to not preclude options and to co-advance our water management capabilities as well as protect the environment, and that there needs to be flexibility built into that policy in such a way that it steers us toward an outcome, but it doesn't presuppose the outcomes, and it doesn't try to be prescriptive. And it's a policy and not standards, it's not regulations, but it steers toward decision-making that results in a optimization at the local context, at the site-specific context. And so we want to encourage the board and the staff to continue along the path of balancing the overall policy objectives and giving them voice and framing the direction in terms of outcomes and in terms of performance standards or performance I guess, directives, objectives, but not to be too prescriptive. And I think that that's the big concern. There are a lot of details yet to be resolved. We do know that the staff has been working with the agencies that are doing these projects. There's a lot of study and specifics on the table, and we're just going to encourage the continued work by the staff to work with the proponents of various types of projects to take those specifics into consideration and provide, I guess, enough of a direction that we know where we're going, but not too prescriptive at the state level. Again, the mix, one of the comments that's been made is, terms like minimize and maximize, those are objective kind of terms or objectives-based terms, but maybe some criteria for when we know when we've arrived at certain types of balancing. However, those criteria need to be broad enough to allow for different kinds of outcomes in different circumstances. So I would encourage continued process. We appreciate the process up to now. We'll be engaging with the other water interests and the Cal DSAL and so forth to try to put in some substantive comments, and we need to let the process work as it should. So we're going to encourage you to take the time you need, whatever that time is, to continue to refine this policy and get it to the point where it can be approved. And I thank you.
Thank you very much. Craig Johns, followed by Tom Luster, and that'll be our concluding speaker.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Craig Johns. I'm here on behalf of Poseidon, and recognizing that Mr. McLaughlin already spoke, I'm not going to try to take extra time. He just wanted, because he forgot, for me to provide these to your staff and for your own personal interests. and to add these into the official record. These are examples of some of the screens at specific sizes. There's a half a millimeter, 3/4 of a millimeter,
good.
1 millimeter, and then the 5 millimeter screen that was also referenced in the Israeli plant. So I'm going to give those to staff, and you
Great.
may find it interesting to take a look at that. The 0.5 millimeter is one you probably are familiar with. It looks like the one that sits in your coffee filter, if you have one of those.
The gold things.
The gold things, yes, the environmentally friendly ones. And then just lastly, a question in going through the SED as a question for staff is, if I may, through the chair. We have submitted over the course of several months a number of studies that were public records on the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's website from the Reading or Red Bluff Research Facility relative to some entrainment work that they've done using the Archimedes lifts and so forth, and have provided them
right.
to staff in the past, asking them to be in the record, but they're not referenced in the SED references. And I'm just wondering if that was an oversight, if you need us to resubmit them to you so that you have them, and that they would be included in the official record. Thank you.
They need to be in the record?
I don't,
If they've been included, they are now in the record.
If they've been included, they are in the record.
Right. The difference is that they were not part of what we cited when we developed the SED. And that's just because of timing.
All right. Mr. Lester,
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board
nice
members.
to meet you.
Hello. Tom Lester with the California Coastal Commission, staff to the commission. I'll do a very brief pre-lunch wrap-up. Just a
I
few-
hope none of you mind. It just seemed that we had the number of cards that we could wrap before 1, and that way people didn't go to lunch and have to come back, because I know people need to drive. You're all nodding, so I did the right thing. Phew, good. Sometimes I ask, but this time I went for it.
We're going to provide comments later, a comment letter a little later. I just want to raise a couple of issues right now. Mainly, I'd like to thank your staff for being very collaborative, their excellent interagency cooperation during the development of the policy. We appreciate, too, that this collaboration has showed up it's built into the policy. I think one of the benefits of this coordination is that the review process that we anticipate from the policy will complement the review that the Coastal Commission does now for that it's been applying to desal proposals. And as a result, we think the board's adoption of the policy will allow a smooth transition from the way we all review projects now and into the future. That said, I think we'll still rely on a lot of coordination and cooperation amongst proponents and stakeholders and agencies. A lot of that happens before we even get to the permitting process. But I think this policy is going to help support that approach. I also want to mention, just for your information, the Commission and Poseidon have convened an expert panel to look at the potential for subsurface intake alternatives at their Huntington Beach proposal. Just wanted to give you an update on that. We convened an expert panel a few months ago. They had a public meeting about a month ago. We're expecting them to have a draft report out in the next couple of months. Basically, they're looking at the site in and near the Huntington Beach proposed location to see what any different type of subsurface intake designs might be technically feasible there. This is phase 1 of the panel's work. Under phase 2, we're going to look at a broader set of feasibility considerations, things like life cycle costs, environmental, the different environmental impacts, the effects on public access, that sort of thing. But the phase 1 approach should be out in the next couple of months. I just want to let you know about that.
No, thank you. And you coordinate with the regional board on things like that? Is that where the, because in some ways, if you've convened an expert panel, you're saving them a certain amount of time. Does it just depend on who it gets to first, or does it usually start with you?
Well, it depends.
Yeah, okay.
We had suggested that the policy include some sort of permit loading order. With all the talk today about the importance of picking a good location, a lot of the work happens before a regional board gets a project. A local government has to determine that a proposed facility is consistent with its local coastal program or its zoning requirements. The Coastal Commission usually gets involved at that early phase. And so the most efficient order is probably to have the local decisions, the Coastal Commission, then the regional board. It doesn't always work like that, and in some cases, it's just a lot of collaboration needed, but we think that's the better order to work with.
Right, so that you're bringing everybody together early to flag whatever their issues are. That's just sort of good big project planning. It seems to
Right.
me from my local government experience that
Yes,
folks that did a good job wanted every agency in early.
right. And the OPC, as your staff mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, has convened this ongoing interagency working group, so project proponents can meet with them before they apply to anybody and hear about.
So where does the state lands slot in?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Ideally, state lands occurs before the Coastal Commission makes a decision.
Okay.
We, as part of a complete application to the commission, we need landowner approval. So anything in state tidelands, the state lands needs to weigh in before the Coastal Commission acts. That's the preferred way, anyway.
Yeah, the OPC folks had talked about this idea of staging and having a preferred approach to staging to cut down on venue shopping, which does happen too. So I don't know, I know our staff are working on this, but this is something I really do think would be cost of compliance positive. I think it could reduce the cost to the stakeholders, and because if you can't find a site, if you can't get permission, you can't find a site, and if you can't find a site, then then that's a problem.
We expect that will continue informally, even if it's not in the policy, this preferred permit.
I'm not suggesting it for the policy,
Yeah,
but I
just
just
leave it in
think
the
it's separately, it could become a practice, or I don't know how we do that sort of thing. We're not that we're giving up our authority.
I'm not going to use the MOU word, but just that
Right.
there's some sort of a
Right,
roadmap or
right.
something. Yeah, because a lot of people did talk about interagency cooperation, and it's good that we've been able to work together. I know we've sent folks to your meetings and
Right.
to explain what we're doing, and the early coordination obviously is helpful to everybody involved, the project proponents, the community, each agency. Having been the agency that got brought in at the tail end to be the skunk at the garden party because nobody called me in early enough,
Yes, that's not fun.
it is important that we flag them all early, so thank you. It's nice of you to come, too. Thank you.
Oh, happy to be here and happy to give thanks to your staff for their good work.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
and you deserve thanks too, because you've been in there, Mr. Lester. I wanted to acknowledge your participation in the stakeholder outreach. You were in all the meetings I happened to go to, and always provide very constructive, detailed input. So I want to compliment your participation.
Thank you. That's our last card. I want to, here's my 2 cents on the extension. And there's a bias, if you heard me yesterday, towards keeping things moving. Having been the queen of extensions in college, I'll admit it now, and law school. Probably high school too, but I can't remember that far back. My preference would be that the comments come in and we have a hearing on the 19th and people give us their suggestions for this clarity and focus. There can be conversations too. And then we see where we are and whether we need to do another round. If we put it off another 2 weeks or a month, that just puts it off another 2 weeks or a month. And while it's fresh, I would prefer people to give us their best comments and keep us going. That's my preference. Unless the staff feels otherwise. I'd rather take more time after that if we feel it's necessary than just give 2 weeks now. 2 more weeks.
And, I want to support you on that, Chair Marcus. I think we had a good preview of what the comments are going to look like. You've thought about the language that we're proposing and maybe some suggested language. I'm looking forward to reviewing that and and see how far we can address, because a lot of the comments we received pertain to issues that I believe staff was trying to address, and maybe from your perspective didn't quite get the language all tightened up. And so that's where I think we are on this process, having like I said, participate in the stakeholder outreach component. And so I hope to, let's stay on schedule, but if we're really hitting the speed bump, we can always adjust.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't want to minimize how much work there is to do, because there is a need for a lot of clarity on all sides, but we're going to get there faster if people give us the language and their comments, and then we decide if we need to come back, then we can do some noodling on how close we got versus just pushing it off. Yeah, go ahead, Sean, since you asked.
Tall. That's fine. I understand where you're coming from. Can I just make a suggestion that maybe if you do have the second comment period, that you maybe just don't limit it to only the small changes that you made? Would that be possible?
No.
No.
Are you sure? But I'll think about that, because I see that's right. I think it depends on, I want to see what we get and where we get, and then decide what we'll do the next time. Because it may be that we do come up with language that's substantially different, and we don't, I want to make sure the whole thing fits together. So in general, I agree with Mr. Bishop, and I understand it, but I want to see where we end up. That's my personal view.
Sean, I feel sorry. I really do. My heart goes out to what you're facing. You may just have to fall on the mercy of the court to see what we can do for you in the future.
It's just the confidence I have in him.
Right. I know he's very good, but I do. This was great, and I actually have several things that I think might be helpful for staff as you start to, as the comments do start to come in, and perhaps even for those who are going to be sending in comments. One is, it was particularly the whole discussion of standards and what is best. Best doesn't sound to me like it's technology neutral. It really is best, right? And but how are we going to determine that? I did not get a strong sense that we have the, and that is an area that I think we definitely are going to need to work on. The definitions seemed important, particularly the life of the project that Steve brought up, looking at when you are replacing a device that has been put in as an intake. Does that fall into needing to look at the new kinds of technologies that are out there? And it seems to me that would be good, but I don't know from a legal perspective if that's how we can do that. So I thought that was important. I thought the 6 ideas from West Basin all seemed very well thought through, and so I am very, very interested in hearing more about what you all have to say about those. And how, Phil, this is for you, Phil. How are we going to? How should we be thinking about this Santa Barbara issue? Because they have decided, or they have done some activities that fall within the standby bucket, if you will. So what do we do? How do we handle that?
I think there are at least a couple of options for the board on that. So Sean's correct. The definition of existing facility would exclude any facility that did not already have a 13142.5B determination. The idea was, I think, generally to not let people kind of avoid the need to go to the regional board for such a determination and still sneak through and be considered an existing facility. Now, having said that, we're in contact with the regional board to try to figure out what the record was back in the early 90s. I'm relatively confident that probably the people who worked on it then have retired. I'll be talking to Sean to see what the city has. It may well be that nobody realized that section in the water code existed, It may be that they thought for some reason that it didn't apply to desalination facilities. So we're still trying to gather some facts about that. As he mentioned, obviously there were analyses that were done to satisfy the California Environmental Quality Act. The board could perhaps decide that those were, essentially functionally equivalent to the analysis that would be required under 13142.5B in that particular example. So that's something that we can explore. There's another totally different approach, which is using the exemption process for emergencies. I'm sure that would be less of a attractive solution for the city because it's a short-term temporary exemption, but we can also be looking at that as well. So we'll spend some time trying to figure out what the board's options are exactly for
That'd
Santa
be good
Barbara.
to do sooner than later.
Yes.
That's great. And my last comment is, and this is kind of separate from the policy itself, but another entity that we should have a discussion with about mitigation, banking, if you will, is the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They are set up to do that kind of thing. And rather than expecting the Fish and Wildlife Service to create something new, maybe we could use something existing. And so anyway, just let's put them on our list, but that's not part of the policy. Thank you.
Well, I concur with a lot of your comments. Also concerned about Santa Barbara. It seems to me that my gut feel is that it's an existing facility, and if the provisions of 13142.5 weren't followed, I guess my question would be, my question would be, what exactly is the remedy? So, just looking for some options, and it sounds like that's where you're headed anyway, so I appreciate that. And I agree, West Basin's, I really liked the 6 points, and in particular, the empirical transport model. It looks like the NGO community also had some questions about the velocity that the ocean isn't constant anyway, so it seems to me that allowing for a site-specific study may address multiple stakeholder concerns, and really would like to dig into that a little bit more. On the issue of screen size, I'm going to go back and take a look at the documents that staff provided in the SED were very helpful. I'm going to go back and review the studies. My head's kind of spinning, though. So anything that West Basin can do to provide, it sounds like you've done a study of your own, the issue with the barnacles and all that. So detailed information would be very helpful. And a question for staff. So before we even get to the issue of screen size, we would, I'm assuming the regional board would have to make a determination that subsurface is not feasible, correct? Because that's the preferred method. So if subsurface is not feasible, the concern that I have is that we not set up a situation where it's automatically infeasible if screens are used. So getting to the issue of screen size. To me, if what West Basin has is accurate, that they would get plugged with barnacles and that it would affect, the ability for the intake, then that seems that even if we have a screen size, it could end up being infeasible. So don't want to set up a situation where these facilities are going to automatically fail based on a determination that we've made on the screen size. Okay, there was one other. On cost, I believe it was Metropolitan that brought up the issue of actual cost, and I didn't look at that closely, but when the issue was raised, I think that it's always useful to have actual figures. So to the extent that anyone, and I don't know if that's exactly where they were headed in that comment, but to the extent that any facility would be able to or willing to provide those costs, I think it's always helpful to have real-world examples. Oh, and then a question of staff. In the language, it says here, a combination of sub and surface might be feasible. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I've heard from folks that would be very costly to do sort of a dual system. Maybe that's not accurate. Is it possible to have two different systems but with one intake such that it wouldn't be cost prohibitive?
So it might be cost prohibitive,
Yeah,
but
I
the
couldn't figure it out.
concept is that if you size, this is going back to the issue about how much water. If you size your plant large enough, subsurface will never work. So if the region uses a concept, or we look at a concept of combining, so that you, for the first 10 million gallons, you use subsurface, and then as you add, you might add to that in terms of surface intake. So you could maximize the amount that you can get from subsurface. And so that you look at both of those together. Though I'm not, I admit that it costs more to do a dual intake. The concept is that there may be feasible to do subsurface up to a certain amount of flow, and you should look at it. It's not true in every instance. It depends on the subsurface conditions.
Okay.
Well,
And
so
then
that
what
people
about the
wouldn't use
issue?
a number to artificially exclude subsurface by saying they want to build, you don't want people to game that
Right,
system.
and we want people to look at, because it may be that the ultimate, the build-out doesn't ever happen.
Right, so they would phase it maybe.
And there could
I was
be,
trying to understand. that.
right, and then, as we got a little taste of that from Coastal Commission perspective, there are other local coastal plan considerations too that would have to be brought into that local decision-making, that would potentially constrain how much subsurface. So it might not just be physical, it might be other, local coastal factors.
On footprint, et cetera, yeah. Okay, and then along those lines, the subsurface galleries and sort of this other technology, could you explain that?
So I'm going to be really naive, and then I'll ask Claire to jump in after I say the wrong thing, but I think of them as very
It's kind of a
similar.
risky practice, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's okay. I consider them the same thing, but they're different technologies. You have subsurface wells that you go down and drill, and a subsurface gallery which you build. So you essentially build an intake that you put your own filter material on top of.
So that would be incorporated in the analysis
Yeah.
on subsurface. Anyway, I'm seeing nodding to heads. Okay.
So you create a big gallery of a sand filter.
As opposed to just taking